What would you do if your family's darkest secret showed up on your doorstep, asleep in your bed? Julian Blackwood lived this life 48 floors above the noise of Chicago in a fortress of glass and steel designed to keep the world out. His penthouse was a monument to minimalism, cold marble floors, sharp angles, and technology that anticipated his every need so he wouldn't have to interact with another human being. At 42, he was the CEO of Blackwood Industries, a global tech empire he'd built himself after walking away from his family's old money real estate fortune. He was a man who dealt in code, logic, and transactions. Emotions were inefficient variables he'd long since deleted from his personal operating system. On this Tuesday night in November, after a 17-hour day closing a multi-billion-dollar merger, Julian stepped out of his private elevator directly into his living room. The lights came on automatically, revealing the sterile perfection of his home. Everything was in its place. The abstract art on the walls was perfectly centered. The chrome accents were polished to a mere shine. Not a single cushion on the Italian leather sofa was out of place. This was a sanctuary, his charging station, a world he controlled completely. He loosened his tie, his mind already calculating the 3 hours of sleep he'd get before his 4 a.m. conference call with Tokyo. He walked down the long, silent hallway, the only sound the soft tap of his expensive shoes on the marble. He pushed open the heavy, soundproof door to his master suite and froze. There, in the middle of his king-size bed, with its 1,000-thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets, was a child. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with dark skin and braids fanned out across his white silk pillow. She was fast asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She wore a simple pink dress, a little wrinkled, and a pair of worn-out sneakers, which she hadn't taken off. One of the laces was untied. Julian's mind, a machine built for logic and data processing, couldn't compute. It was impossibility. There were 3 levels of security to get into his building: a doorman who knew not to admit anyone, a keycard-activated elevator with a weight sensor, and his private elevator that opened directly into his apartment, requiring a biometric thumbprint scanner. The front door to his apartment, which no one ever used, was a solid steel frame with a code and another thumbprint lock. There was no possible way a child could be here. His first thought was transactional. This was a threat, a kidnapping attempt in reverse, a bizarre corporate espionage tactic designed to create a scandal. Someone was playing a game with him, and he hated games he didn't control. His hand went to his phone, his movements precise and automatic. He dialed the head of his personal security team, a man who earned 7 figures a year to ensure moments like this never happened. "There's an intruder in my apartment," Julian said, his voice low and cold, barely a whisper. "A child, in my bed. I want your team here in 5 minutes. Silent entry, no sirens. And when you're done, I want a full report on my desk explaining how my $3 million security system failed. Consider your employment under review." He hung up before they could respond. He walked slowly toward the bed, his mind analyzing every angle. Who was she? How did she get here? What did she want? Her presence was a glitch in his perfectly coded world, a variable he couldn't account for, and it made the hair on his arms stand up. She stirred slightly, a soft sigh escaping her lips. Julian stopped, holding his breath. For a moment he just watched her, so small, so out of place in his sterile, oversized life. She looked peaceful, vulnerable, everything he was not. Then he saw it. She was clutching something in her small right hand, held tight to her chest, even in sleep. An old photograph. It was faded, creased, the corner soft from years of being held and looked at. A treasured object. He moved closer to the bed, the scent of something like rain and clean laundry rising from her, a smell that didn't belong in his world of recycled air and faint ozone from his electronics. He reached down, his fingers hesitating for just a second before gently, carefully, prying the photo from her grasp. Her fingers resisted for a moment, then relaxed. He turned the photograph over. and the world stopped. The man in the photograph was him, Julian Blackwood. But a version he barely remembered. 20 years younger, maybe 19. A college kid with a goofy, unself-conscious smile and a life not yet hardened by ambition and betrayal. His arm was wrapped around a young woman. A beautiful black woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a smile so bright it seemed to light up the whole picture. They were sitting on a park bench, laughing about something. Happy. Genuinely happy in a way Julian hadn't been in decades. He remembered her instantly. Sarah Jenkins. His heart, a muscle he thought had long since atrophied from disuse, gave a painful, shocking lurch. It felt like an engine seizing after years of running cold. Sarah. The girl he'd loved when he was a boy. The girl his family had forbidden him from seeing because she was the housekeeper's daughter. The girl who had disappeared from his life without a word 43 years ago, taking the only color he'd ever known with her, leaving him with a logical, gray world of his own making. The little girl on his bed stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. They were the same eyes. The same kind, warm, intelligent eyes from the photograph. She looked at him, not with fear, but with a strange, hopeful recognition. "Are you my father?" she asked, her voice small and clear in the silent, cavernous room. The question hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back, the photograph slipping from his numb fingers. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up, showing two smiling ghosts from a life he'd buried long ago. The security team chose that exact moment to burst through the bedroom door, weapons drawn, ready to neutralize the threat. And Julian Blackwood, the man who controlled a global empire, the man who had an answer for everything, had no idea what to do. The bedroom exploded with quiet, professional chaos. 4 men in black tactical gear moved in perfect formation, their weapons trained on the small figure in the middle of the bed. "Stand down," Julian ordered, his voice hoarse, unrecognizable to himself. "Everyone out." The team leader, a former Special Forces soldier named Cole, hesitated. His eyes darted from his billionaire boss, who looked pale and shaken, to the small child sitting up in his bed looking more confused than scared. "Sir, our protocol is irrelevant." Julian's voice snapped like a whip, the cold authority returning. "Get out, now." The team retreated as silently as they'd entered, closing the heavy door behind them. Julian was left alone in the room, with the girl and the ghost of a woman he'd spent his entire adult life trying to forget. The photograph lay between them on the floor, a bridge between two worlds he'd never known were connected. "My name is Maya," the little girl said. She didn't seem afraid of the men with guns. She only had eyes for Julian. "My mommy said you were my father. She said you were a good man who just got lost." Julian's mind was a whirlwind of denial and logic, fighting an emotional war. He hadn't seen Sarah since he was 19. She'd left, vanished, taken the check his mother had offered her and disappeared from his life completely. This couldn't be his child. The timeline was impossible. He wasn't her father. He couldn't be. The math didn't add up. "Your mother is Sarah?" he asked, his voice shaking despite his efforts to control it. "Yes, Sarah Jenkins." She pointed to the photograph on the floor. "That's her. From a long time ago. She was beautiful, wasn't she?" "Was?" The word caught in his throat. It was a question, but he already knew the answer. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. "She died," Maya said, her voice matter-of-fact in the way that children are when they've accepted a terrible truth. 3 weeks ago. Cancer. It was fast. She looked down at her hands. "Before she died, she gave me this picture and your address. And a letter. She said if I ever needed help, I should come find you. She said you would take care of me." Julian sank into a chair, the cold marble feeling like ice against his skin. A daughter. He had a daughter. And her mother,
His first and only real love was dead. The perfectly constructed walls of his world were crumbling around him, and he had no blueprint to rebuild them. "How did you get in here?" he asked, his voice weak. He needed a piece of logic to hold on to, a security breach, a flaw in the system, something he could fix. "My Aunt Simone works in the building. She's Mommy's older sister. She cleans the offices on the 20th floor. She has a key card that gets her on the service elevator. She let me in tonight while she was working. She didn't want to, but I begged her. I showed her the letter Mummy wrote me." At that exact moment, the apartment's main door buzzed, the sound jarring in the silent penthouse. Julian's security chief Cole spoke through the intercom. "Sir, there's a woman at the front desk, Simone Jenkins. Says her niece Maya is missing. She thinks she might be in the building."
"Let her in," Julian said, his voice flat. He felt like he was watching a play he'd been forced to participate in without a script. A few moments later, a woman in a janitor's uniform rushed into the bedroom. She looked like an older version of Sarah, the same kind eyes but lined with exhaustion and fear. Her face was a storm of relief and anger. "Maya! Oh, thank God!" Simone rushed to the bed and hugged the little girl so tight Maya let out a small squeak. Then she turned to Julian, and her expression hardened into a glare that could have melted steel. "So you're him. You're Julian Blackwood, the man who broke my sister's heart and left her pregnant and alone?" The words were an accusation, a judgment, a 40-year-old verdict. "I didn't leave her," Julian said, standing up, his own anger rising to meet hers. It wasn't old anger, buried for decades. "She left me. She took a check for $50,000 from my mother and disappeared without a word." Simone laughed, a bitter, angry sound that filled the room. "A check for $50,000? Is that the story you tell yourself to sleep at night in your castle in the sky? My sister loved you. She adored you. She was on her way to tell you she was pregnant with your child. She went to your family's estate to do it. And your mother, Eleanor Blackwood, wrote her a check and told her if she ever contacted you again, she'd make sure my sister and her unfortunate mistake would regret it for the rest of their short lives." The story matched his memory, mostly, but there was one crucial, impossible difference. "Your sister told you my mother paid her to leave?" Julian asked, his voice cold and precise. "Of course that's what she told me. That's what happened." "No," Julian said quietly, "that's not what happened. Because my mother told me something very different." He walked to the antique desk in the corner of his room, a piece he'd inherited from his grandfather and kept for reasons he didn't understand until now. He opened the locked drawer and pulled out a single yellow document, a contract dated July 12th, 43 years ago. He handed it to Simone. "My mother told me Sarah wanted nothing to do with me," Julian said, his voice completely devoid of emotion, like he was reading a stock ticker. "She said Sarah's family thought I wasn't good enough, a rich kid with no ambition, that they demanded money for her to end the relationship and never see me again. My mother made me sign this contract. It says that in exchange for $20,000, I, Julian Blackwood, agree to never contact Sarah Jenkins or her family again." Simone stared at the contract, at Julian's angry, looping teenage signature at the bottom. "This is a lie. This has to be a forgery." "It's not," Julian said, "because the next day my mother made a deposit into my trust fund. $20,000. The memo line read, Jenkins Settlement. He had the bank records to prove it. He'd kept everything, every piece of data from the worst transaction of his life." Simone looked from the contract to Julian, then back to Maya, who was watching them with wide, confused eyes. "Wait," Simone said slowly, the pieces starting to click together in her mind. "You're saying my sister's family demanded money from your family to break you up?" "That's what I was told. That's what I've believed for 43 years. That Sarah didn't love me, that she took the money and ran, that our entire relationship was just a con." "And Sarah believed you took money to leave her," Simone whispered, the horror of what had happened dawning on her. She believed you abandoned her and your unborn child for $20,000. She died believing that.
The truth hit them both at the same time, an explosion in the quiet room. They'd both been lied to. Someone had played them both, orchestrated a double-sided betrayal to ensure a rich white heir didn't end up with the poor black housekeeper's daughter. Your mother, Simone breathed, Eleanor Blackwood. She did this. She paid Sarah to leave, telling her it was your decision. And she paid you to stay away, telling you it was Sarah's decision. She broke you both and made you hate each other for it. Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. The neat, logical world he'd built, a world based on the premise that love was a foolish, transactional emotion that had burned him once and would never burn him again, was a complete lie. He hadn't been abandoned. He'd been manipulated. Sarah hadn't been greedy. She'd been heartbroken. And Maya, this little girl clutching a faded photograph of a love he thought was a teenage fantasy, she wasn't some impossible anomaly. She was his daughter. The realization didn't bring joy. It brought a white-hot rage that burned through the cold logic he'd wrapped himself in for decades. A rage directed at one person, his mother. She told me you laughed, Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. My mother, when she told me you took the money. She said you laughed and said, for $50,000, I'd leave anyone. She told me you asked if there were any other rich boys in the family looking for a good time. Simone flinched like she'd been hit. Sarah cried for a year straight. She lost 20 pounds. She had to drop out of college because she was so heartbroken she couldn't focus. She never loved anyone else. Not really. She spent her whole life believing the love of her life sold her and his unborn child for $20,000. Julian's breath hitched. Unborn child? Simone looked at him with pity now instead of anger. She didn't know she was pregnant when your mother confronted her. She found out 2 weeks later. By then, you were gone. Your mother told you you'd already left for a summer program in Europe and had explicit instructions not to be contacted. Sarah was alone, scared. So she took the $50,000. Not for herself. To give her baby a chance at a life you apparently didn't want. The room spun. Unborn child. A child he never knew existed? A child who grew up to be Sarah, the woman who had died just 3 weeks ago? The mother of the little girl sitting on his bed. This wasn't just a stolen love story, it was a stolen life, a stolen family. She had a daughter, Julian said, stating the obvious because his brain couldn't process anything else. Maya's mother, my daughter? The word felt foreign in his mouth. Yes, Simone said. Your first daughter, her name was also Sarah. Sarah Jenkins II. She was a brilliant musician, a kind soul, looked just like her mother. And she died of the same cancer that took her mother 6 months ago. Julian stumbled back, hitting the wall. Wait, Maya's mother wasn't the Sarah I knew? No, Simone said gently. The Sarah you knew, my sister, was Maya's grandmother. And your first daughter, Sarah II, was Maya's mother. Grandmother, granddaughter, a whole lineage he never knew. A family tree with branches he never knew had grown, flowered, and died. My daughter had a daughter, Julian whispered. It was too much. The data was overwhelming. His system was crashing. Yes, her name is Maya, and her father died in a car accident 2 years ago. When Maya's mother got sick, there was no one left but me. I'm a janitor, Mr. Blackwood. I clean offices for a living. I don't have the resources to raise a child like Maya. She's a genius, top of her class, needs special programs, special schools. Sarah, her mother, was working 3 jobs to pay for it all, just like her grandmother before her. History repeating itself, a cycle of struggle he'd been completely blind to. When Maya's mother died, she left 2 things for Maya, that photograph and a letter. Now with your address, just your name, Julian Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries. She told Maya that if things ever got desperate, she should find you. Not for money, but because you were family. Because she deserved to know her grandfather.
Grandfather. The word hit Julian harder than father had. He was a grandfather at 42 to a child whose mother he never met, whose grandmother he loved and lost because of a lie. "Get out," Julian said, his voice shaking, not to Simone and Maya, but to his security team who were hovering in the hallway. "Everyone out of my building now. Cancel my meetings, cancel my calls. Don't let anyone in. No one." Cole, the security chief, hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" "Get out," Julian roared. And the sound was so full of pain and rage that Cole just nodded and left, closing the door quietly. Julian turned back to Simone and Maya, his face a mask of grief and fury so profound it was terrifying. He was a different man than the one who'd walked into this room 30 minutes ago. The cold, logical billionaire was gone. In his place was a man who just discovered his entire life was a lie. "I'm sorry to you," he said, the words raw. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know." But apologies were just words. Julian Blackwood dealt in actions. He walked to his desk and picked up his phone. His hands were shaking, but his finger was steady as he scrolled through his contacts. He stopped at a name he hadn't called in 20 years. "Mother?" "I need to make a phone call," he said to Simone, his voice dangerously calm now. "I need to talk to my mother." If you're new to Topcore, hit that subscribe button right now, because when Julian confronts the woman who stole his family, you're about to witness a war between billionaires that will burn a 40-year-old lie to the ground. Chapter 4. The Matriarch's Confession. Eleanor Blackwood, at 82, was still the most formidable person Julian had ever known. She lived in the family estate in Lake Forest, a sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and generations of secrets. She answered his call on the second ring, her voice as crisp and cold as a winter morning. "Julian, it's past midnight. This had better be important." "I found her," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was back in control now, but it was a different kind of control. Not the cold logic of a CEO, but the focused calm of a predator. "Found who?" Eleanor asked, her tone already bored. "My granddaughter. Her name is Maya." Silence on the other end of the line. For just a second, Julian thought he'd finally broken through his mother's iron control. "You're being emotional," Eleanor said finally, her voice dismissive. "I assume some woman has shown up with a child claiming a connection to you. It happens when you have money. Have your lawyers handle it. That's what they're paid for." She had a photograph, Mother, of me and Sarah Jenkins from 43 years ago, and a letter from her dying mother, my daughter, Sarah II, telling her I was her grandfather, and her great-aunt is here telling me the story of how you paid Sarah to disappear. That girl's family was poor and opportunistic. They saw a chance to extort money from a wealthy family, and they took it. I handled it. You should be grateful. Then why? Julian's voice dropped, becoming dangerous. Did you deposit $20,000 into my trust fund with a memo that read Jenkins Settlement and tell me it was money they demanded from me? The silence on the other end was longer this time. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice had lost its casual dismissal and gained a steely edge. "I did what was necessary to protect you, to protect this family. You were 19 years old, a boy, infatuated with the help. Do you have any idea what a scandal that would have been? A child out of wedlock with a black housekeeper. It would have destroyed your future, your place in this family, the empire your grandfather built." "So you destroyed her life instead," Julian whispered. "I gave her a generous settlement. $50,000 was a fortune to a girl like that in those days. More money than her family had ever seen. She had a choice. She took the money. You told her I had agreed to it." Julian's voice was rising now, the cold calm cracking. "You told her I wanted the money instead of her and our child." "Details," Eleanor said coolly.
Insignificant details. The result was what mattered. You were free to marry a suitable woman from a good family, to take your rightful place as heir to the Blackwood fortune. I secured your legacy." "My legacy?" Julian laughed, a bitter, broken sound that made Maya flinch. "I walked away from your legacy 30 years ago. I built my own empire, bigger than anything you or grandfather ever dreamed of. And I did it fueled by the belief that love was a transaction and trust was a liability, a lesson you taught me that night. A valuable lesson, it seems. It made you a billionaire. It made me an empty man in an empty apartment who just discovered the only woman he ever loved died thinking he was a monster. It made me a man who just learned he had a daughter who lived and died without ever knowing him. It made me a man who has a granddaughter he never knew existed." His voice shook with a rage that had been buried for 40 decades. "You didn't do it to protect my future. You did it because you were a racist who couldn't stand the thought of a black child carrying the Blackwood name. You did it because you were a snob who couldn't stand the thought of your son marrying the housekeeper's daughter. Don't you dare call it love." "Watch your tone, Julian," Eleanor warned.
More dangerous than ever before. I'm coming for you. Not for your money, I don't need it, but for every lie you told, for every document you forged. I will use every resource at my disposal, and you know how vast those resources are, to expose what you did to Sarah, to me, to my daughter, to my granddaughter." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The Blackwood name you are so desperate to protect, I'm going to burn it to the ground, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it." He hung up. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Simone and Maya were still there, watching him, their faces a mixture of fear and sympathy. "I'm sorry," Julian said to them, his voice raw, "for what my mother did, for what I believed for so long. I'm sorry." Simone nodded, tears in her eyes. "Sarah never stopped loving you. She named her daughter after both of you. Sarah Julianne Jenkins. That's what she called her." Julian felt like he'd been stabbed. Sarah Julianne. A name that connected them forever. A name he'd never known. "I'll take care of everything," he said to Simone. "Maya, you're safe now. You're home. We'll figure out school, your things, everything." Maya looked at him with those big, intelligent eyes. Sarah's eyes. "Are you going to be my grandpa now?" Julian knelt in front of her, just like he'd seen Tank do in that video he'd watched a few years ago. The biker who'd adopted a little girl. He finally understood. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I am. And I promise you, I'll never get lost again." But as he made that promise, he had no idea how ruthless his mother could be. He had declared war, but Eleanor Blackwood had been preparing for this battle for 43 years, and she had weapons he knew nothing about. Keep watching, because when Eleanor Blackwood decides to fight back, she's not just going to try to discredit Julian. She's going to try to take Maya away from him forever. The morning after Maya's arrival, Julian Blackwood's penthouse transformed from a sterile sanctuary into a war room. The minimalist furniture was pushed against the walls to make room for whiteboards, monitors, and a team of the most ruthless private investigators and forensic accountants money could buy. Julian, who hadn't slept in 36 hours, stood at the head of the conference table he'd had moved into his living room, a cup of black coffee in his hand. Maya and Simone were asleep in one of the guest suites, finally safe, but Julian knew the real battle had just begun. "What have you found?" he asked his lead investigator, a former MI6 agent named Kalen. Kalen brought up a series of documents on the main screen. Eleanor Blackwood didn't just separate you and Sarah Jenkins. She orchestrated a lifelong campaign of systematic sabotage against the Jenkins family. The evidence was damning. When Sarah used the $50,000 his mother had given her to start a small catering business in a different city, a surprise tax audit from an IRS agent who happened to play golf with Julian's father shut her down within a year. When Sarah got a good job as an office manager at a consulting firm, an anonymous call to her boss about her questionable past and financial instability got her fired. The call was traced back to a burner phone purchased by Eleanor's personal assistant. When Sarah finally met another man, the man who would become the father of her daughter, Sarah Julianne, and tried to build a new life, a private investigator hired by Eleanor dug up a minor youthful indiscretion from his past and leaked it to his employer. He lost his job and, overwhelmed by the pressure, left Sarah. Eleanor didn't just want Sarah gone, Kaylin summarized. She wanted her to fail. She spent a fortune ensuring Sarah Jenkins would never be successful enough, happy enough, or stable enough to ever be a threat. She systematically destroyed every opportunity Sarah had, keeping her poor and struggling for her entire life. Julian felt sick. He'd spent 40 years believing Sarah had left him for money when in reality his mother had been actively hunting her, ensuring she never escaped the poverty Eleanor believed she deserved. "There's more," Kaylin said, his expression grim. "We spoke with the old family lawyer you mentioned, Arthur Vance, 90 years old, in a nursing home, his conscience heavy with a lifetime of secrets." On the screen, a video played. An old, frail man speaking into Kaylin's camera from his hospital bed. "Eleanor was always afraid of you, Julian," Arthur Vance wheezed. "Afraid that if you ever discovered what she did, you'd come after her. She was terrified of your ambition even as a boy. She knew you wouldn't forgive her, so she created an insurance policy." The lawyer explained that Eleanor had created a completely false paper trail. Forged documents, doctored photographs, and paid off witnesses who would testify that the Jenkins family were criminals who had been extorting the Blackwoods for years. "She created a narrative," Vance said, "that Sarah Jenkins was part of a family of grifters, that they targeted you, that when you ended the relationship, they began a 40-year campaign of harassment and extortion. She has proof of threatening letters Sarah supposedly sent, proof of financial demands, proof that she was the victim, always protecting her family from these predators." "Where is this proof?" Julian asked, his voice cold. "Those files," the lawyer said, "are in a vault at the old estate. She calls it her legacy protection fund. It's her nuclear option. If you try to expose her, she'll release those files to the press and the police. She'll paint Sarah as a criminal, you as a fool manipulated by a young girl, and herself as the long-suffering matriarch protecting her family. She will destroy Sarah's memory and brand your granddaughter as the legacy of an extortionist." Julian now had two missions, and they were in direct conflict. First, he needed to get those files and destroy them to protect Maya's future. Second, he wanted to make his mother pay for what she'd done. But doing one might make the other impossible. If he went after his mother legally, she would undoubtedly use those files to destroy him in court and in the press. He had to get to them first. "We need to get into that vault," Julian said to Kaylin. "It's a biometric lock. Requires Eleanor's thumbprint and a voice command. Impossible to get into without her cooperation." "Nothing is impossible," Julian said. "Find a way. Bribe her staff. Clone her biometrics. I don't care what it costs. Get me those files." But as his team began planning the impossible, Eleanor Blackwood made her first move. She didn't wait for Julian to attack. She struck first. Simone's phone rang. It was Child Protective Services. "They're taking Maya," Simone cried after her call, her face ashen. "An anonymous report. Unstable living situation. Association with a man of questionable character. They're saying because I brought her to your building, I put her in danger. They're coming to take her into emergency custody." Julian stared at her, the trap snapping shut around him. His mother wasn't just going to fight him with lies in the press. She was going to use the system against him. She was going to take his granddaughter. The one thing he had just found. The one thing he now couldn't bear to lose. He'd walked into a war he thought he could win with money and power. He was about to learn that his mother fought with weapons he couldn't counter. Family courts, social workers, and the built-in assumption that a little black girl was better off anywhere else than with a rich, white man with a secret past. Eleanor wasn't just trying to protect her legacy, she was trying to take Julian's. The social workers arrived with 2 police officers in tow. They were polite, professional, and completely immovable. "We have a court order for emergency removal," the lead social worker, a woman named Gable, said without emotion, "based on an anonymous report alleging child endangerment." "This is absurd," Julian said, his lawyers already on the phone. "This is my granddaughter. She is safe here." "Sir, you have no legal relationship to this child. According to our records, she's in the temporary care of her great-aunt, who brought her to this building without your permission, exposing her to an unknown situation. Until we can verify the child's safety, she will be placed in state custody." Maya started to cry, clutching Simone's hand. "Don't let them take me, Auntie." Julian saw red. This was his mother's doing. He could feel her hand in every procedural word, every bureaucratic obstacle. She was using the system like a weapon. "This is not happening," Julian said. He got on the phone with his lead attorney. "I want a judge now. I don't care who you have to call. I want an emergency hearing." While his lawyer scrambled, Julian made a different call, a call his mother would never anticipate. He called Michelle Foster, the investigative journalist who'd broken the Amara Jefferson story years before. "Michelle, it's Julian Blackwood. I have a story for you, and I have about 30 minutes before social workers take my granddaughter away." What happened next was a masterclass in modern media warfare. As the social workers tried to coax Maya out of the apartment, Michelle Foster's story went live. Not in a newspaper, on Twitter. A single tweet with a photo. The faded picture of Julian and Sarah on the park bench.
This is Sarah Jenkins and Julian Blackwood, 43 years ago. Today, their granddaughter Maya is being taken by CPS from her billionaire grandfather's home based on an anonymous tip after he discovered his mother orchestrated their breakup over race. A story of love, lies, and a system being weaponized. Find Maya. The tweet exploded. Within 10 minutes, it had been retweeted 50,000 times. Hashtag Find Maya was trending. The social workers, oblivious, were still trying to get Maya to come with them. "It's just for a little while, sweetie, until we sort things out." Then Mrs. Gable's phone rang. It was her supervisor. Then her supervisor's supervisor. The story was on CNN, Fox News. The mayor's office had called, the governor's office. Julian's lawyers secured an emergency telehearing with a family court judge. By now, the story was so big the judge had already seen it. "I'm looking at an emergency removal order based on an anonymous tip," the judge said. "And I'm also looking at a live news report claiming this is a case of familial retaliation and potential racial bias. Mrs. Gable, what is the immediate danger to this child?" "Sir, the living situation is unverified. The relationship with Mr. Blackwood is undefined." "Is the child in physical danger right now?" "No, but..." "Then the order is stayed. The child will remain in the custody of her great-aunt, Miss Jenkins, at Mr. Blackwood's residence until a full hearing can be conducted in 72 hours, and I'm issuing a gag order on all parties. This will be tried in my courtroom, not on Twitter." The social workers left defeated. Julian had won the first battle, but the war had just begun. Eleanor Blackwood, furious that her plan had been so publicly thwarted, went on the offensive. She released her Legacy Protection Fund files to a rival newspaper known for its sensationalist reporting. The headline the next morning was brutal. The Jenkins family's 40-year extortion scheme. How a housekeeper's family terrorized the Blackwoods for generations. The articles were filled with Eleanor's forged documents, fake letters from Sarah demanding money,
paid testimony from witnesses claiming the Jenkins family had a history of running scams. It painted a picture of Sarah as a manipulative predator and Julian as a fool who'd fallen for her trap. The public narrative fractured. Hashtag Find Maya was now competing with hashtag Justice for Eleanor. Social media became a battlefield of opinions. Was this a story of racial injustice or a classic family inheritance battle? Was Maya a victim or a pawn in her family's long con? Eleanor went on national television, giving a tearful interview to a sympathetic host. "My son is not himself. This girl and her family have twisted his grief over a youthful romance into a weapon against his own mother. They've been trying to get their hands on the Blackwood fortune for 40 years. It's tragic." She was good, believable, the grieving matriarch protecting her family from predators. Julian knew he couldn't win by fighting her on her terms. He couldn't release documents to counter her documents. It would just become a confusing mess of he said, she said. So he did something his mother, with her old money tactics, would never see coming. He released a video. No words, no accusations, just professionally shot footage of Maya. For 60 seconds, she sat at Julian's grand piano in his penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. Her small hands flew across the keys, playing a complex, beautiful piece by Chopin with a skill and passion that was breathtaking. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. Her mother's story. Her grandmother's story. A story of beauty and talent that had been struggling to be heard for decades. As the final note faded, a simple white text appeared on the black screen. Her mother, Sarah Julianne Jenkins, worked 3 jobs to pay for these piano lessons while fighting the cancer that killed her. Her grandmother, Sarah Jenkins, worked 2 jobs her whole life to give her daughter that chance. They didn't want their family to be rich. They wanted them to be brilliant. Then a final line. Tell us again how this is about money. The video had 50 million views in 24 hours. It cut through all the noise, all the accusations, all the spin. It didn't argue. It didn't accuse. It just showed the truth. The truth of a family that valued art, talent, and dedication over everything else. The truth of generations of Black women who had sacrificed everything for their children's dreams. Eleanor's public support collapsed overnight. The narrative she had spent 40 years and millions of dollars constructing was dismantled in 60 seconds by a little girl playing the piano. What happens when a matriarch's empire of lies crumbles? Keep watching Top Core and subscribe now, because Julian's next move isn't about winning a media war. It's about getting justice for the 2 Sarahs who never got it, and it will change the Blackwood legacy forever. Eleanor Blackwood became a social pariah overnight. The charity boards she sat on requested her immediate resignation. The social clubs she belonged to revoked her membership. The friends she'd had for 50 years stopped returning her calls. She was left alone in her massive Lake Forest estate, surrounded by wealth that could no longer buy her respect or influence. She had protected the Blackwood name so fiercely that she was the one who ended up destroying it. While his mother's empire of influence crumbled, Julian moved with cold, calculated precision. With public opinion so overwhelmingly on his side, his legal team went to work. They filed a motion to have Eleanor declared mentally unfit to manage her own affairs, using her public lies and manipulative behavior as evidence of paranoia and declining cognitive function. They also secured a court order granting Julian temporary access to the vault at the family estate, arguing that the Legacy Protection Fund contained fraudulent documents used to harass and defame the Jenkins family, and they needed to be secured as evidence. Julian didn't go to the estate himself. He couldn't bear to see his mother. He sent Kalen, his security chief, with 2 of his best lawyers. They found Eleanor in the study, sitting in the dark, surrounded by portraits of Blackwood ancestors who looked down on her with silent judgment. She didn't resist. She just handed over the key and whispered the voice command. The legacy is secure. Inside the vault, Kaylin found exactly what the old lawyer had described: meticulously forged documents, fake police reports, and signed affidavits from witnesses who'd been paid to lie. It was an entire fictional history designed to paint Sarah Jenkins and her family as criminals. Kaylin brought the files back to Julian's penthouse. Julian spent an entire night going through them, his rage building with every page. He saw the beautiful, loving letters Sarah had written him, intercepted by his mother. He saw the birth announcement for their daughter, Sarah Julianne, which had been sent to the estate and marked "Return to Sender." He saw a lifetime of stolen moments, stolen connections, stolen family. At dawn, he took the boxes of lies to the industrial incinerator at one of his manufacturing plants. He didn't just shred them. He watched them burn, the flames turning 40 years of his mother's hate into ash. The family court hearing for Maya's custody was a formality. Julian had already established paternity with a DNA test. He'd set up a trust for Maya that made her independently wealthy. He hired the best child psychologists to ensure she was processing her grief and the recent trauma in a healthy way. But most importantly, he showed the judge the video of her playing the piano. "Your Honor," Julian's lawyer said, "the question before this court is, what is in the best interest of the child? I submit that the best interest of this child is to be with the family who has valued her talent, her intelligence, and her spirit since the day she was born." Julian was granted full legal guardianship. Simone Jenkins was given a lifetime stipend and a position on the board of a new foundation Julian was creating, but she chose to remain Maya's beloved great aunt, living nearby and providing the family connection and history that Julian couldn't. The war was won. Eleanor was defeated. Maya was safe. But Julian felt empty. He had avenged Sarah. He had secured his granddaughter. He had won the war his mother started. But victory felt hollow. He had spent his life building an empire, and now
That he had a family to share it with, he realized the empire was the thing standing in the way. The 17-hour workdays, the constant travel, the pressure to always be acquiring, always be winning. That wasn't a life a child could be a part of. His logical mind analyzed the data. The problem was his company, Blackwood Industries. The solution was simple. He called an emergency board meeting. His board, still reeling from the public drama, expected him to announce a new PR strategy or a charitable initiative to repair the family name. Instead, he said 2 words: "I'm selling." The boardroom at Blackwood Industries went silent. The 10 board members stared at Julian like he'd just announced he was moving to Mars. Selling? Selling what? A subsidiary? Everything, Julian said. All of it. Blackwood Industries. The whole company. I've already had my investment bankers draw up the initial proposals. We're putting it on the market at the end of the quarter. But Julian, we're at the top of our game, a board member protested. The stock is at an all-time high. The merger you just closed is projected to increase our market share by 30%. Why would you sell now? Because my priorities have changed. Julian looked around at the faces of the people who'd helped him build his empire. They were brilliant, ruthless, dedicated, and they were all strangers. For 20 years, I've dedicated every waking moment to this company. It's been my life, my family, my legacy. But I was wrong. A company isn't a legacy. It's just the collection of assets. A legacy is what you leave behind in the hearts of people. It's the impact you have on the world. And my impact, until recently, has been non-existent. He thought about his mother, alone in her mansion, her legacy now one of racism and deceit. He thought about his father and grandfather, men who'd built fortunes,
but were remembered for their coldness. I spent my life running from the Blackwood name, and in the process, I almost made the same mistake they did, building something powerful but empty. George, the chairman, tried to reason with him. Julian, think about this. You can run the company and have a family. People do it all the time. People like you do, Julian said, not unkindly, but I don't know how. I only know how to do one thing at a time with absolute focus. For 40 years, that focus was on this company. Now, my focus is on my granddaughter. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The decision is made. My shares represent a controlling interest. We're selling. Your job now is to get the best possible price. The sale of Blackwood Industries was the biggest tech deal in history. A consortium of investment firms bought the company for $67 billion. The day the deal closed, Julian held a press conference. He stood at a podium with Maya on one side and Simone on the other. He looked different. The suit was still expensive, but less severe. The cold, logical mask he usually wore was gone. He looked tired, but also lighter, freer. Today, I sold the company I spent my life building, and people want to know why. The answer is simple. He put a hand on Maya's shoulder. Because I have a new job, learning how to be a grandfather. The reporters shouted questions, but Julian held up a hand. I spent 43 years running from a ghost, running from a memory, running from a lie that told me to love was a liability. I'm done running. Now I'm building. He announced the creation of the Sarah Jenkins Foundation, funded with the entire $67 billion from the sale of his company. My granddaughter's mother, Sarah Julianne, was a brilliant musician who never got to share her gift with the world. Her grandmother, Sarah Jenkins, was a kind, loving woman whose life was systematically destroyed by prejudice. This foundation will be their legacy. He outlined the foundation's mission. First, to provide legal and financial support to families torn apart by racial and economic injustice. He said, no mother should ever have to choose between keeping her child and keeping her dignity.
Second, to fund educational and arts programs for children in underserved communities. Talent is everywhere, he said, looking at Maya. Opportunity is not. This foundation will change that. The reporters were stunned. A billionaire voluntarily liquidating his entire empire to fund a social justice foundation? It was unheard of. "Mr. Blackwood," a reporter called out, "what about your mother, Eleanor?" "My mother and I have no relationship," Julian said simply. "She made her choices. I'm making mine." In the years that followed him, Julian didn't build another company. He built the family. He sold the sterile penthouse and bought a sprawling brownstone in Brooklyn with a backyard, something Maya had always dreamed of. He filled it not with minimalist art, but with comfortable furniture, photographs of Maya and Sarah and Simone, and the sound of piano music. He legally adopted Maya, giving her the Blackwood name his mother had tried so hard to deny her ancestors. He learned how to be a father at 43, a grandfather at 42. He went to parent-teacher conferences. He helped with homework. He sat in the front row of every piano recital and cried openly, not caring who saw. He taught Maya about business and coding. She taught him about laughter, forgiveness, and unconditional love. The Sarah Jenkins Foundation, with Simone at the helm, became one of the most impactful philanthropic organizations in the world. It dismantled systemic barriers, funded thousands of scholarships, and gave voice to the voiceless. It was the legacy of love built from the ashes of hate. Eleanor Blackwood died alone 2 years later, leaving her fortune to a distant cousin, who promptly squandered it. The Blackwood estate was sold to a developer who turned it into a luxury rehab center. The legacy Eleanor had fought so hard to protect vanished into obscurity. The true Blackwood legacy was now being built in a brownstone in Brooklyn, in community centers in the Bronx, in music schools in Harlem. It was a legacy defined not by wealth, but by worth. One evening, Julian was helping a 16-year-old Maya with her calculus homework. She was struggling with a particularly difficult problem. "I can't get it," she said in frustration. "The logic doesn't make sense." Julian looked at the equation, then at his granddaughter. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. Her eyes, Sarah's eyes, sharp with intelligence. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the most logical solution isn't the right one. Sometimes you have to trust your heart even when the data tells you you're wrong." Maya looked at him, surprised. "That doesn't sound like the billionaire who built a tech empire." Julian smiled. "That man was lost. You helped me find my way back."
The brownstone he bought in Brooklyn didn't look like success to anyone who measured life in stock charts. It looked like life to anyone who measured it in warmth. The front steps were flanked by planters Simone filled every spring. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon on Saturday mornings. There were fingerprints on the hallway walls no cleaner was ever allowed to scrub away. A piano lived in the front room, its lid always open. Julian learned new rituals he never expected to know. Parent-teacher conferences, grocery lists that included sticky notes with questions like, "Which brand of cereal has the animal on it?" The art of saying, "Tell me everything," and sitting down long enough to hear it. The Sarah Jenkins Foundation, which Simone ran with a spine of steel and a heart that didn't bend, grew into a nationwide force. People started telling their stories to each other in rooms the foundation built. Families fighting through impossible systems. Simone opened the event with a 5-minute speech that made hardened attorneys cry and suspicious donors commit. "We don't give out miracles. We build conditions where they can show up." On an ordinary Tuesday 6 months later, an email arrived from Juilliard. The subject line didn't need to be opened to be understood. Maya screamed, loud enough that the neighbor's dog barked in agreement. That night, she played the piece she'd been saving, one of the works her mother used to play when the apartment was quiet. Everything else felt too loud. Julian stood in the doorway and let the sound fold around him like a promise kept. The press wanted quotes. He didn't give them any. He let the acceptance letter speak for itself, pinned on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a piano key. Graduation season arrived like an old friend. Flowers in every corner store, gowns carried like new skin. The morning of her high school commencement, Maya ate toast in her cap and sneakers, her robe draped over the back of a chair like a waiting hand. Julian made terrible coffee and switched to tea without comment when she made a face. Simone triple-checked the camera batteries and then checked them again. They took the train to the ceremony because that's what everyone else was doing. On the platform, an older black man stepped forward with tears in his eyes and introduced himself as a retired teacher. "You don't know me," he said to Maya, "but I watched a video of you playing the piano and decided to go back to the senior center and volunteer. Thank you for waking me up." Maya hugged them like she meant it. "Thank you for telling me," she replied. "Sometimes you don't know where the sound goes." The auditorium was packed. Cameras were not supposed to be used during the ceremony, which ensured that at least 50 would be. As the valedictorian read her speech and the principal mispronounced 4 names in a row, a reporter no one remembered seeing at the door slipped into the aisle and approached the end of the row. "Miss Jenkins?" she whispered to Maya. "Quick question for the campus press. When you're at Juilliard this fall and people ask about your father, which one will you talk about? The billionaire or the one your grandmother loved?" Maya turned in her seat, the corner of her mouth lifting in a way that looked exactly like the woman in the photograph. She didn't answer. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope that had been opened and resealed so often the flap no longer stuck. She slid the paper out halfway, then tucked it back in as the principal called the first row to stand. "After," she said to the reporter. "Ask me after." The reporter blinked. "After what?" Maya stood, smoothing her robe. "After I play." On a stage at the front of the hall, a piano waited with its lid open.
If someone asked you what you inherited, would you name money, or names, or music, or the way you stay when it's hard? If you're watching Tapcore for the first time, subscribe, because this last chapter hands you the answer we've been building toward. The school had planned a chorus and 2 speeches. It did not plan for a grand piano lifted in through the side door at dawn. Simone had made a call. The foundation had written a check. The music teacher had cried twice and then agreed. When the first round of diplomas was handed out, the principal cleared his throat and made a face like this was not in the program. A special performance by a graduating senior. Maya walked across the stage the way she crossed streets, as if she learned both from practice and from looking both ways. She sat down at the piano and placed both hands on the keys. The hall, bristling with cameras and impatience and cheap folding chairs, went still the way rooms go still when someone is about to tell the truth. She did not play Chopin. She did not play Debussy. She started with a melody that had no famous name. A melody her mother used to hum when the bus ran late and the pot on the stove needed watching. It moved like walk and breathe music, turning around itself and finding its way home. People who knew it hummed. People who didn't recognized it anyway. The way you recognize kindness even when nobody taught it to you. Halfway through, she shifted. The melody folded into a classical piece that had lived on her music stand for months, then returned to the first tune as if rescuing it. When she finished, she didn't stand right away. She touched the keys once more, like saying thank you, and then turned toward the audience. She didn't look at the principal. She looked at the row where Julian and Simone were sitting, hands clasped like a rope they both held onto. "I wasn't going to say anything," she said into the microphone, voice steady. "Graduation speeches are usually long. Hers wasn't. I wanted to talk about the man who learned how to say, 'I don't know.' No, and then stayed long enough to learn. The one who sold the thing everyone said was his legacy to make room for the thing that actually is. The one who stands in the kitchen at 7 a.m. and burns the toast and laughs anyway. The one who told me to play the piece that wouldn't leave me alone. That's the father I'm taking with me." She reached into her pocket and held up the envelope the reporter had seen. "And I'll talk about the letter my mother wrote before she died," she said without using the word the viewers were waiting for. It says, "If you find him, tell him I didn't want money. I wanted him to promise he would not let our daughter learn to be small. We kept that promise. We will keep keeping it." She looked into the cameras without flinching. "I'm taking both names with me. Not because I have to, but because I can. Jenkins means people who work themselves empty and still sing. Blackwood means people who learn what power's for after they use it wrong. Put them together and you get me. That's the story I'll tell." The room applauded the way rooms applaud for someone who has done something clean in a place that so often feels messy. Julian stood only when Simone tugged his sleeve and hissed, "Stand up before you fall over." He wiped his face in a way he would have been ashamed of 5 years ago and didn't care about at all today. Diplomas resumed. Names were read. The piece of paper that had meant everything when he was 19 felt like a receipt now. The paper that mattered was the one on the refrigerator door, under a piano magnet. After the ceremony, the reporter found them in the crowd and held out her recorder. "So," she said to Maya, "which father?" Maya smiled. "The one I just described. If you need a headline, call him the father who stayed." The reporter nodded, then surprised herself by putting the recorder down. "Thank you," she said, almost like a student. They took photos with classmates and grandparents who carried folding chairs and cousins who wore sneakers under their church clothes. On the sidewalk, a white-haired woman in a navy dress approached Simone and took her hands. "I knew your sister when she worked at the clinic. She told me once that she loved the boy and that the love didn't have a place to live. I've been waiting decades to see where it went. Thank you for letting me see. Simone swallowed and nodded. It went where it was supposed to. It just took the long way. Later that week, they held the Foundation's summer gala in a small theater, not a ballroom. No one wore tuxedos unless it made them feel happy. On stage, the ribbon was cut for a new program that would offer legal aid to families whose cases were dismissed for the wrong reasons and reopened for the right ones. The first scholarships in a new fund for young artists from public schools went out that night. Each envelope had the same sentence printed inside. Your future is not a reward for suffering. It is your due. At the end of the evening, Julian walked up to the microphone alone. No script, no slides. Just a quiet room and the man he had decided to be. I used to think legacy was what people said about you when you left the room. Now I think it's who gets to stay after you go. The woman I loved is gone. The daughter I didn't meet in time is gone. My mother is gone. But the work, this work, stays. And the girl who walked into my house with a photograph and a question, she stays. That's the legacy I wanted and didn't know how to ask for. He stepped back. People stood. Not because they were trained to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. On the way home, they detoured. Not to the lake, not to a fancy rooftop, to a small park with a bench no one would put on a postcard. Someone had left a single flower there, stuck between the slats. Maya sat for a minute with her hands folded like the bench would answer if she asked it something. What did you wish for back then? Julian asked softly. She smiled. I already got it. They walked home under the kind of sky that doesn't need to be pretty to feel like a cover. In the brownstone, the kitchen light was on. The piano lid was open. A magnet held a letter to the refrigerator door and didn't let it fall. Before bed, Maya tucked the old photograph back into the book where she kept it. She had made a copy and framed it months ago, but the original still lived close to the places she slept. She turned out the light and listened for the sound that meant someone else was still awake and would be until she wasn't. Down the hall, Julian stood in the doorway for a second longer than necessary, the way fathers do when they can't quite believe the room stays full when the door closes. He turned and walked back toward the piano. His hand hovered over the keys. He didn't play. He placed his palm on the wood and left it there, like claiming something gently. There would be more hearings, more fights. Some days the world would forget what it had learned from a video and would need to be taught again. That was fine. That was why the Foundation existed. That was why family existed. At the door, the mail lay in a neat stack. On top, an envelope with no return address. Inside, a single photo. Not the old one. A new one. The park bench again. But this time with 3 people. A woman with kind eyes who'd never leave their story. The man who had found his way back. And the girl who had shown him the way home. No note, no caption. No need. The true inheritance had already been claimed. And the work of keeping it together had only just begun.